We can send your student to the school of their dreams and send you to your dream retirement. Visit us at elitecollegiateplanning.com to get started.
Hi, welcome to College Knowledge. Today, we're taking a look back at our most popular episode from 2022. We know that you loved it, so we brought it back.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of College Knowledge. I'm your host for today, Clay Kovach, and we have the honor of being joined today by Dr. Chris Martine, David Burpee Professor in Plant Genetics and Research Biology, and the Department Chair at Bucknell University. So, Chris, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
So, I guess to kind of give it an overlook here, right? You know, biology is a pretty big field, a pretty big area to study. For your specific area of expertise, how would you explain that to everybody listening?
Yeah, I guess you're right about biology being really broad, right? It's the study literally of all of life on Earth, right? So that's pretty broad. For me, my focus has primarily been on really biodiversity science and in particular on plants, right? So I'm a botanist. I teach a lot of botany courses, do a lot of research in botany, but what we're learning in botany, we can kind of apply to lots of other different types of organisms and ideas, general ideas in biology.
And if any student out there listening, you know, is interested in biology or even, you know, starting that track in high school, the AP route and looking at it that way, you know, what kind of steps could they take or how might they know they're right for your field, right? They're right for more of the botany side, the biodiversity side and genetic research.
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you've taken a biology course or or have had experience with biology and you already know you really like it, right? If you love it, then that's a pretty good sign that it might be something you want to study further in college. On my side of things, right, on the biodiversity side and even the plant related stuff, I guess it's just a matter of you know, do you walk around the world outside your home and become fascinated by the life around you, right? And I do, right? And that's sort of those of us who do this kind of work in biology, where it's sort of biodiversity stuff, kind of have that feeling. And as you mentioned, right? I mean, I do some genetics work as well, and it's sort of using DNA and genetic technologies to sort of understand the phenomena that we see out in the natural world. So there's that also, right? But I think sort of the main thing for me is that if you really are interested in biology and you kind of love it and you look forward to it, that's a pretty good sign that it's something you might enjoy doing in college. Yeah.
You know, is that I always try to understand, you know, from how the person we're talking to got into that study, right, and wanted to do that with their life. For you, what was that pathway like? Was that something that, you know, like you said, you're walking outside and looking around, thought this is pretty cool?
Yeah, you know, for me, it was not quite as easy because I'm a first gen college student, right? I'm the first person in my immediate family to go to a 4-year college or university. And so, you know, I grew up outdoors. I grew up knowing the names of plants and animals, and it was just sort of a thing I took for granted. And then when I went to college, I didn't really even understand that I could sort of do that sort of thing as a major and as a career until I started meeting professors and taking courses that let me know that was possible. So it wasn't quite as an easy sort of connection for me because of that. But I do think it was sort of like having spent time outside as a kid and having sort of this background knowledge that really sort of helped me.
Right.
But then it was the courses, right? Then it was my professors who inspired me and the stuff I learned in their classes.
So how did you wind up where you're now at Bucknell?
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey and went to Rutgers for my undergrad. I was undeclared going in, wasn't sure whether I was going to do some kind of performing arts thing or some other thing, and then eventually sort of found my way there and ended up with sort of a major that focused on forestry and conservation biology. Worked for the state of New Jersey for a while as a K through 12 educator, and then went back to get my master's at Rutgers and then a PhD at University of Connecticut. And that's sort of the moment where it all came together for me, where I was like, okay, I'm going to be a college professor and this is the route I'm going to go.
Yeah, and now you're a department chair, so there's obviously a lot of responsibility that's kind of come your way.
That's true. Right now, when I'm not talking to you, in a little while, I'll be working on planning our course schedule for the spring semester. And so there's lots that goes into being department chair, but luckily we all take our turn.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of the reason we reach out to the schools we do is because of, you know, the ranking and the long-term standing of being a top school for that program, right? So for Bucknell, obviously biology is one of of the biology field and schools that have those programs. Bucknell's been ranked as one of the top for a long time. What could you say is kind of maybe a reason that you see Bucknell always at the top or maintaining that status?
Interesting. Yeah, there's sort of a couple things there. One is that I think we have always historically taken the idea of being teacher scholars pretty seriously. You can see that on lots of different websites, different universities, that our faculty are teacher scholars, people who pay attention to both how they teach and how they instruct and are passionate about education, but are also actively doing research. Often that incorporates undergraduate students as part of that. And that's something we've done really well for a long time. We take all of that very seriously, and we do a lot of research mentoring. There's lots of undergraduate research opportunities. We have a summer program that funds students to stay on campus for 10 weeks. They do a fellowship, they get housing, and they basically work full time as researchers. We had something like 50 students who were here this past summer doing that. So that part, I think, is part of what we're doing. Like there's sort of this like traditional science education component, but then there's also this sort of possibility of doing research, learning how to do science, being closely mentored with professors. But I think maintaining that and that reputation also requires that we are willing to adapt and evolve, right? And so one of the things that we are pretty consistently doing is sort of examining our curriculum and how we're teaching and who is in our major and who we keep in the major. And so we've just in the last few years blown up our entire introductory curriculum and rebuilt it. Just taking a really hard look at what we're doing and whether it's working. And we've revised everything, right? As of last year, we've changed our intro curriculum, and I'm really excited about it. It's meant to sort of make biology really welcoming and inclusive, and build a community here, and have students get some sort of connection to the science in a way that we weren't sure they were getting before. So, that willingness to sort of, we're doing a pretty good job, but consistently sort of examine that and think about how we can get better, I think are two of the things that we've done pretty well.
That's fantastic. And, for students getting involved in the actual research, is that something that happens as the courses go on? Or are there students that maybe are a little bit younger and say, hey, can I kind of sit in on this and see what you guys are doing? How does that work?
I guess sort of, for a really long time, undergrad research was largely a thing that a certain number of students in the major could do. You hook up with a professor, typically sophomore, junior year, but sometimes we have programs that allow students to sort of step in their very first year. And so it was a thing that was available that many students were doing, but not all. What we've done as part of our new curriculum revision is we're now offering in the very first year of the major something called a CURE, the course-based undergraduate research experience. I think parents and students will sort of see that acronym floating around. What that is a course where students basically from day one they're presented with a study system. They sort of come up with a question, they design an experiment or a study, they collect data, analyze the data, present their findings, all in the course of a single semester. And lots of schools are sort of moving towards incorporating that in the curriculum, but it's not always available to all the students. And one of the things we've been really sort of trying to do, and we have achieved now, is that every single one of our majors is going to have that semester where they actually do some research and get that experience. And that's something we're really proud of.
That's great. And I think that's probably going to be a big factor in grabbing the interest from students to say, hey, let's actually look at this hands-on outside of just what we're learning, but let's actually put it to use here and see what we can do with it.
That's the hope. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Now I know that as I'm going through everything and was looking, over the website and everything you do, the thing that really jumped out to me was plants are cool too, right? The little program. Why don't you tell us all about that? Because I looked into it a little bit, but for everybody listening, what's the whole premise behind that?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about is science communication, sort of delivering science to non-scientific audiences. And in this case, this is one of the things that I do toward that. It's a YouTube series called Plants Are Cool Too. Been working on it for about a decade with my production team of Paul Frederick and Tim Kramer. And the idea here is that we make these mini documentaries, right, that are supposed to basically highlight a cool plant or a cool plant story, and then also the person or people who do that science. So it's like, here's why plants are awesome, but also here's who scientists are, right? They're kind of regular people who found a path and a passion. And I sort of want to show not only why plants are really amazing, but also the prospects for folks that want to maybe grow up and be scientists, right? That you can do it because these folks are doing it too. So I love the series. We've sort of been hamstrung a little bit by the pandemic over the last couple of years, but folks can go on YouTube and find Plants Are Cool Too and find a whole set of episodes there to check out. I tell people all the time, I make them so people will watch them, but also so that people will use them. So, I hope that classrooms all around the world are using them. And
that's a great idea. And looking at it from, not just students that are like the late high school and into college, but younger students kind of getting the ball rolling and just maybe kind of bringing back the build eye side of things and whatever that other show was where they showed us and they roll the TV in and give it a go. But I think that's fantastic. And it really jumped out to me as kind of that extra step in, let's kind of pull behind or pull back the curtain, pop the hood, look at what's actually going on here. Because there's, you read into it, a lot of big biology words some people might not be familiar with, but when you see what's actually going on, it's probably fascinating. I mean, do you see from the students you work with, especially, or I guess I could say students that first come into programs, do you see them like realizing as they go through what they want to do with this or what kind of opportunities they have when they're finished?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And I think sort of a lot of the folks maybe that are listening in right now, thinking about biology might be thinking of pre-health, right? Pre-med or PA or nursing or whatever, right? And that's going to be, a lot of the majors that we have. But what I tend to find is that, there are folks that choose biology because they just are really curious about the study of life on Earth, right? About all things from how cells work all the way on up to ecosystems, right? But I also find that folks that sort of choose biology because they love it or because they're thinking about med school are sometimes able to find all sorts of other new and exciting things they love about the science and about other subjects, right? Once they're here in our program. We're a small liberal arts college, right? So a big part of our curriculum is not just biology, not just the science and math, but also encouraging students to explore and look into the humanities and the arts and the social sciences. So you sort of can't come to a school like Bucknell and not get some of that as well. And I think that really helps people develop as people and develop intellectually, but also become like people with really interesting, kind of cool, diverse backgrounds, which is a good thing to be, right?
Yeah, and kind of speaking of the backgrounds and exploring, I was also looking, I saw you did some time studying in Australia, looking at your own research and then coming back up to this area. So tell me a little bit about that or your own research side of things.
Yeah, I just got back short time ago from my 7th research expedition in Northern Australia. I feel so grateful and lucky to have that opportunity to do that sort of stuff. I study a group of plants in the outback that are part of the nightshade family. So these are actually eggplant relatives that do all sorts of really cool stuff in terms of their reproductive biology, pollination, and that sort of thing. But we're, doing all sorts of neat stuff, field-based stuff and greenhouse-based stuff and genetics-based stuff, looking into this particular group. And, it's been the kind of thing where I've been now studying this group for over 20 years. And I thought eventually I'd sort of move on, but I love these plants. I love the questions they generate. And, we're getting all sorts of students and other collaborators involved in it. We also do a lot of stuff now recently in the state of Pennsylvania, where Bucknell is located, where we are using genetic tools to try to better protect rare plants in the state and working with the state to sort of better manage threatened and endangered species. And that's been really cool. It's local, it's really fun, and they're like tailor-made for student projects. So it's the kind of thing that I'm super excited about also.
Yeah, and I think when you say endangered species or threatened, everyone's mind jumps to animals, right, or large mammals. Yep. But I don't think people maybe understand until you look into it just how much that whole conversation can be applied to the world of plants and that side of the ecosystem. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot going on there. Yeah. What would you say, like, from the research that you guys are able to do with that? How much has that changed over the years and kind of progressed to be something that people are paying attention to and listening to?
I think one of the keys and one of the reasons I sort of became really attracted to plants as an undergrad was that I sort of realized that if you walk into any given habitat and you sort of say, what kind of place is this? What you begin to describe is the plants, right? It's like, what trees are there? What shrubs, what wildflowers? Is it all grassland? Is it a forest, right? It's all first. You start with like, what are the plants? And so I think even if you're talking about, a large endangered mammal, a lot of the threat to that mammal was probably degradation of the habitat of the place where it lives, right? And that is often the plants, right? So I think we have come around to that idea that it's like, if you protect the plants, you're often then also protecting everybody else who relies on them.
I mean, no pun intended, but just kind of taking it all the way to the root, really.
That's right.
What the cause of that is.
Yep.
So I know
that was totally intended.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Now, what I know the plants of Northern Australia are definitely going to be a little bit different than the Eastern Central Pennsylvania region. What do you see more in PA, and what does your research kind of have you doing when you jump back from somewhere around the world to the hometown?
Yeah, Pennsylvania, and I growing up in New Jersey, I really didn't get out to this part of Pennsylvania very much. I didn't really understand how diverse this state is in terms of its ecosystems and habitats. And so it turns out there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here in terms of just the geography of the state. There's a lot of plants that have a more northern distribution that sort of just come into northern Pennsylvania. And there's a lot of things that have a southern sort of distribution that just come into the southern part of Pennsylvania. So we've actually got all sorts of plants that we might consider sort of on the edge of their natural range, which is already a recipe for them sort of being relatively uncommon and maybe even threatened. So I found this to be a pretty fascinating space in which to do some of that work. And the fact that it's right in our own backyard makes it really awesome for summer field work with students and, doing the lab-based stuff during the school year.
Do you see a lot of those students that come along on the research when they graduate and they kind of take their own path? Do you see a lot of them going into that kind of area of research, like sticking to what they're doing or jumping around? I mean, how does that usually go?
I appreciate that question because yes, some students end up going into whether it's botany or conservation or biodiversity or genetics kind of thing, right? Based on what they've sort of done in my lab. But I think that one of the really important points to make here is that for students heading off to college and thinking about doing undergraduate research, the actual sort of organism or the system that a professor works on is actually somewhat less important than the experience that you get, right? Is this person a good mentor? Is this person going to sort of support you? Are you going to learn how to do good science? Is there a good lab community? And those things, like learning how to do science and sort of in a welcoming and inclusive environment, is actually the most important thing. And especially if you're thinking about long-term goals or career goals, right? Having done research at all as an undergrad is a really big deal. So often I have students that come in and they're like, well, I don't want to be a botanist for a career. And I say, that doesn't matter to me. I want you to come in, like, learn how to do science, and maybe we'll answer some cool questions and you'll go off with this experience and maybe go apply it. Right. And some of those students say, oh, now I'm really into plants, but others go and do what they were going to do, whether that's med school or some other thing.
Right. But they were able to get that mentorship and that experience going through it. That's fantastic.
That's right. And connecting with a professor like that often means a lifetime of mentoring, right? I tell my students all the time, if you want me to be, I'll be a person that you can reach out to for the rest of your career, the rest of your life. Right?
That's what I was going to ask about. How much to, not to interrupt you on that, just that was something that I wanted to ask. How often do you hear from them afterwards, or work with them, or get calls asking those questions?
Yeah, pretty frequently. And I love it. Right. Whether, often it may be sort of, oh, hey, I'm applying for this job or grad school, right? Are you willing to sort of give a reference? And I always am. Right. But then there's also those calls or those texts that you get that just people want to sort of talk, right? Ask advice or talk about sort of what they're doing. And I love that kind of stuff. And what I love is that, I have professors like that myself, right? I have last week just a professor I checked in with who I graduated college in 1996, and I still have this prof that I can check in and talk to, right? And I love that. I love having that option. And I want to also sort of offer that to my own students.
So when you offer that, is that what the Martine lab is? I saw that on your site. Is that your specific research that the students come along with?
Yeah. So the Martine lab is sort of, the lab that runs, it's the botany lab in the Rook Biology building here at Bucknell. So, it's sort of a lab community where we do use plants as sort of our model system, but we ask all sorts of different kinds of questions. I've been really lucky to have some awesome postdoc collaborators that sort of work in my lab. Like right now, Dr. Tanisha Williams and Dr. Melody Sain are folks that sort of collaborate with me and co-mentor students, and that's been awesome, right? But it's a and I've used that word community on purpose, right? It's intentional because it's a place where we do work, we do science, but I also want it to be a place where our students can come and feel safe and welcome, and not just sort of feel like they're working and doing science, but also have a place to go and connect with people that are passionate about learning and discovering.
Crash course on college funding at elitecollegiateplanning.com. This will explain different types of loans, types of financial aid, savings vehicles, and much more.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's probably the biggest moment it clicks for students, is when it becomes a passion and not, hey, I got to go into the lab and get my hours in. It's right. I want to do this. This is what I want to go and study and be a part of. And we also always have a lot of parents listening, right? Wondering kind of what's going to be the best path for the student and stuff like that. I guess I'll give you the platform to talk a little bit about what you see, as far as jobs that are more common now, maybe some that are a little hot right now, or will pop up. There's going to be, what do you typically see in that whole field?
Yeah, in biology generally,
but also kind of more towards your specialty, looking more on what you guys do in your lab.
Yeah. I mean, for starters, there's a lot of opportunities still out there for folks to get involved in conservation work and biodiversity work. There's lots of opening up possibilities for folks that sort of parlay their science into sort of communications kind of stuff, which is a big thing that I like to do. The other thing is that, there are whole fields that are sort of expanding and blowing up right now, right? So folks are going to hear words like bioinformatics, right? So this is, one of the things that we've built the capacity for, and only really the last decade or so, is the ability to look at really large genetic and DNA data sets, right? So that whole field of looking and analyzing and dealing with those is what we might call bioinformatics. And so students who have some background in doing DNA work or genetics work and analyzing those sorts of data sets could head into those sorts of jobs. And those are things that exist all over the place, right? Including in, research hospitals and things where folks are looking at these large genetic data sets. So having some background and being able to do that kind of bench work, I've seen some students that have done really well in those areas by having those sorts of experiences as well.
So over the years, you say that the genetic side has become a lot more prevalent in studying biodiversity?
I think it has. And I think it's all about how technology has caught up with our questions, right? So,
yeah.
When I was a PhD student, and this was only in the early 2000s, my whole dissertation was based on 1,200 base pairs, basically 1,200 readings of DNA, right? And now we have data sets that are in the millions because we've developed the computer capacity, right, to basically deal with these mega data sets. And the power of that is really incredible, right? So when you submit something like, I don't know, what is it, 24andMe? Is that what it's called?
23andMe, yeah.
23andMe. Yep. I should know how many chromosomes. What you're doing essentially is somebody is doing what I'm describing, right? And it wouldn't have been possible, in terms of the technology a relatively short time ago, right? So that's a whole fascinating, if you've got a combination of interest in computers and biology, that's a pretty sweet combo.
That's great. And like you said, the technology is kind of catching up there, and not going to see that slow down anytime soon. No. One of the other things I had some questions about, right? When you're looking maybe more prevalent around our area or kind of your area, looking on the agricultural side of things, I know that's in its own world, right? Its own separate kind of thing. But, talking about the progression of, hey, realizing these pesticides aren't good, right? This is affecting much more than just the local area. This hits the river, this goes down, and the whole pollution thing from there. I mean, how involved are you guys in kind of seeing that and saying, hey, this is coming from a whole nother, this is coming from miles away, and it's affecting things down here? I mean, is that something that you guys have any part in?
I think the way that we're sort of contributing to that discussion, and this is particularly when we're thinking about biodiversity science, and trying to look at, we are honestly, right, globally, we're in a biodiversity crisis. We're seeing rates of extinction that are really higher than we might expect otherwise, right? And so, one of the key questions when you're studying biodiversity is sort of what threatens it, right? And so as you begin to have those conversations and do the kind of studies we do that say, oh, wait, this species is actually in trouble, right? then you start to think, okay, why, right? How do we deal with it? And then sort of then you start to get into those questions, right? Is it related to global climate change? Is it related to some other thing that's going on, invasive species or something like that, right? And so I think we're sort of almost at least in my lab, what we're doing is sort of generating data sets and conclusions that then help folks then solve some of the other problems that are related to what we're saying, right? So we're not directly sort of looking at that, but I do think we're contributing to the conversation.
It seems like it's always stemming from the curiosity, and having that curiosity to say, well, what's causing this and why?
That's right.
Going through that whole process of everything.
Yeah. Although what I will say is that one of the areas that in our department that we're moving toward with a colleague named Dr. Tanisha Williams is looking more closely at climate related changes in the distributions of different types of species, right? So that's a new area of our curriculum we're now expanding in because she's now coming aboard the department.
So going off of, like you said, there's a large scale level of extinction in plants right now. There's a biodiversity crisis in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I guess talk to that a little bit, because I think most people probably don't realize that that's happening or how that may affect them down the road.
Yeah, I think it turns out, what a lot of research has shown is that systems that are diverse, that have a lot of different types of organisms in them, often, not all the time, but often tend to be really healthy systems, ecosystems, right? And so the protection of biodiversity is about like keeping all the cool things on the earth around here, right? But it also is a way of basically like protecting the system we live in, right? It's a pretty delicate global ecosystem, and as we've sort of seen, it's not that hard to sort of like perturb it, right? So if there's all sorts of other species on Earth that are disappearing or suffering or not doing well, that's a pretty clear indication that there are problems that could for sure affect us, right? Whether it's from like being able to feed everybody or still sort of deliver medications to folks or develop new medications, right? Like that stuff kind of becomes diminished if the system doesn't work, and the Earth is sort of a finite system, right? So when other things are going extinct, other things are disappearing and not doing well, that's usually an indication that we might be affected by it too. So on a grand scheme of things, that's sort of one of the things I think about. That's one of the benefits of sort of studying biodiversity. Yeah. And one of the things we do in the lab, we've been really lucky. We've been able to describe a number of new species, particularly from Australia. And, that sort of gets to this other idea, like, how do you even know what's out there, right? You have to sort of know what's on the planet before you can protect it, right? And eventually protect whole habitats and systems that we depend upon, right? So going out and still discovering biodiversity, right, is still a really important thing. And it's one of the reasons why we do it in my lab group.
Yeah, I guess that's still a pretty common thing is finding new species and watching that blossom as well. As you said, there's going to be the demise of some of these plants are going to go away, but there's also going to be new ones. I mean, in the whole world of biodiversity, clearly not my strong suit, which is why I love talking about this with you here. What's kind of the first telltale sign that, hey, there might be a problem if this isn't addressed?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of seeing a species dwindle to really small numbers, right? A few individuals is sort of by eye the easiest way to sort of tell. But one of the things that we're trying to do and how we want to contribute to some of this is that if we can also then sort of assess these rare species that by eye are not very common, assess their genetic condition, right? Are they really inbred? Do they have really low levels of genetic diversity, right? And if we answer those questions as yes, then we know, okay, there's an even bigger problem here, right? So it's a way of sort of connecting this sort of ability to do this genetic kind of bench science and connect it to like traditional sort of field science and use both things to protect species, which is pretty important.
And so what's a day in the life for a student researching with you? Like, are you guys going out in the field? Is it mostly lab? Like, how does that go for a student that's going to take part in the lab here?
Yeah, I think it depends. And if it's during that summer fellowship period, students are kind of coming in the morning, and depending on the project, some students are going out every day and doing field work and going out and assessing plants and collecting plant specimens and getting us, the stuff we need to do more work. Some students are heading into the greenhouse and they're going to spend a day maybe doing hand pollinations as part of a reproductive biology experiment, and others are going to head straight to the bench, right, in the lab and start doing DNA extraction. So it sort of depends on the project and depends on where we are on a given project. During the academic year, that there's a lot going on, right? Students have their courses, which are paramount, and then they've got a social life, and they've got maybe athletics or other clubs or things that they're invested in that are important to them, and then also might be doing this undergrad research. And so that's where we really try to be flexible and work with our students to find the times that work for them to come in. But it sort of just becomes sort of part of what they're working on as sort of their full experience of being in college. And again, it's not something everybody gets to do, right? But the students who have that experience, I think, learn a lot. I think have a really important sort of formative kind of experience. And it also looks awfully good on your resume when you get out, right? So
that's great.
Worth investing in. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting the opportunity to actually do that undergrad research. You don't really hear about that a whole lot from this kind of a field. And do you see a lot of students go on to, all right, we're going to go into our graduate program. We're going to keep staying. We're going to go to a doctorate. Or do you see some students go in, like you said earlier, they got the experience, they got the research side, and they got that mentorship from you, and they decide they're going to do something else? I mean, is it pretty split? Is it a pretty good mix of students, or do you see a lot of them want to kind of follow in your footsteps or the other professors' footsteps and continue research and continue to teach the next generation?
I think it's pretty split, but I do think many students who have a research experience as undergrads tend to want to continue doing research. It's one of those, the aha moment for me came when I was in a master's program, where I remember looking at a textbook and suddenly going, wait, like everything in this textbook, someone had to actually figure out. Like I had taken it for granted that like, we just know all this science, right? And,
right. Yeah.
and I thought, wow, like how do you get to be that person who gets to actually contribute to human knowledge of how the planet works, how science works? And that's what made me want to go on to do my PhD. And I think for a lot of students, when they engage in research, they have that same moment where like, oh, this is really like, I can be part of that process that's been going on for generations to just try to figure out how stuff works, right? Something I might discover could be in the next edition of a textbook, and that's kind of cool and powerful,
right?
Yeah.
Right. That's the reason you can't use the same textbook 4 years in a row. The next generation is going to find some more info to put in there.
That's right. Yeah.
And when obviously Bucknell and where you guys are located, the Pennsylvania area, not too far from our headquarters where we are, but do you see a lot of students coming from all over to attend Bucknell?
I do. Yeah. Bucknell is interesting, right? Like our typical sort of student population, I guess historically has kind of come from the Northeast, a lot of New Jersey, New York kind of area. But increasingly that's changed, right? Folks from the West Coast, folks from all over the country, international students. And that's awesome, right? That's exactly what you want. You want a student body of diverse perspectives and backgrounds, right? It's really just like what I'm talking about with a natural ecosystem being really healthy when there's lots of diversity there. And I think it's the same with a college campus and with a student body. And it's something I think we're working really hard to sort of support here at Bucknell. So there's students from all over the place. Yeah.
That's great. And you come here, learn everything, go back to either where you originally had come from, your state, your area, or somewhere else, and just spread what you've learned. And as the research progresses, it's I went to Bucknell, and you spread that name and everyone knows about it.
Yeah. That's right.
One thing I like to ask is, coming from your end, especially as a department chair, what would you say is the advice you would give to high school students right now that think they want to study, whether it be just biology or more specifically biodiversity or botany? What advice would you give to them as far as next steps they should start thinking about?
Yeah, I think, gosh, that's probably a really important question, right? If you're a high school student and you're thinking about this sort of thing, take as much science as you can, right? And I know that for a lot of the students that I see, it's it's kind of like one class a year kind of thing, and you may take one bio course before you graduate, right? But if you can get into some other classes and take them, because if you're thinking about doing something for the next 4 years, which might turn into a whole career, the more background you have in it and the more you sort of test it out, the better, right? And if you come out of that and say, oh yeah, I love science, I love biology, then you're sort of heading down the right path. The other thing I would say is that, try to sort of also find other experiences, right? Whether it's summer volunteering somewhere, or even something like an internship or that sort of thing. That I think it's or even a summer job that somehow connects. Right? I have a student coming in this semester who's been working at a garden center for a couple of years, right? And that
Wow.
might not seem like, oh, that's like a science job, but she's coming in with all of this amazing plant background. So when I connected her, I was like, oh yeah, that's amazing. Like, we have research plants that we got to grow, and you're going to plug right in and know how to do that, right? So, any kind of experience at all can be really important, right? And that's just one example.
That's perfect example too, right? Because for someone listening that maybe doesn't have the opportunity to go shadow or attend a university's program over the summer, going and working at a garden center, seeing how it all comes together, right? Or just kind of getting the experience that way. It's all around you.
Yeah. I actually think that, honestly, any kind of job where you're responsible for getting there at a certain time and putting in your hours and working hard is going to be a good experience, right? Because you're going to learn not only that kind of self-discipline, but also, I think one of the things that about science that's sometimes hard to get past is that, it doesn't always work, right? You don't always sort of do an experiment and set up a thing and go, oh yeah, perfect, it all worked out, right? There's a lot of sort of hills and valleys in research, right? And that'll be the case with the college experience and coursework. And so, having built up some grit and some resilience as a young person is totally a benefit in whatever you end up doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said on your research in Australia, right? You've been looking at that for a long time, and every time we interview, professors in research, there's usually some area or something that they're really passionate about that maybe most people would have said, you know what, I'm done with this after a few years, but you just keep going at it and keep putting your head down and learning. Like you said, there's certainly going to be failure involved, but that's the whole part of the process.
Right. That's right.
And you're going to get to it at the end. Now, one question that we have to ask, it's the question we ask everybody. It's usually maybe it catches you a little off guard, but what would you say your favorite or most influential book is? Right? Or favorite, most influential book you've ever read?
I do like to read, and I actually really like fiction. I actually don't read a ton of science books, right, in my free time, but I do like a few of them. I've really used over the years. There's a book called The Species Seekers by Richard Conniff that I use in a lot of my classes that I love. It's about the history of species discovery. Rob Dunn has a number of books I really like, including a book called Never Out of Season that I also use in a class, but I just love the book. Some recent ones, Miranda Montgomery wrote a book called Lessons from Plants I really like, and Cassandra Quave has a new book called The Plant Hunter that I also really like. But if I'm being honest, the book that has influenced me the most was a book I got for Christmas in 2020 from my wife called 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. And I love music. And this is sort of like the history of the album from 1955 to the early 2000s. And I decided I was going to spend 2001 listening to all 1001 albums. And I did it in a year. I listened to over 1,000 records, and I obsessed over that. I lived in that book for a year. So to say that didn't influence me would be crazy.
Does music help plants grow? That's a Buster's question. We'll play some classical music with the plants. Is that completely false?
You know what? I don't know. What I can tell you is that plants really do respond to their environment, right? Yeah. They are acting in response to what's around them in a really similar way to animals. They're just typically doing it at a much slower rate that we can't really see, right? So they're doing all sorts of stuff. So, I imagine maybe that if they're exposed to nice sounds, I don't know. They don't hear per se, right?
Right.
But they can some plants respond to touch and vibration. And so, who knows? What I know is that music makes me happy when I'm with my plants. So maybe then I'm making the plants happy.
That's great. I love it. Well, kind of wrapping up here, the end and the books. That's a pretty interesting perspective to take, right? There's obviously you're gonna have those books that kind of sculpt you in your interest, but kind of taking that step back and something, hey, I like music, and that's gonna in some way or another influence what I'm doing, right? Or influence your mood. Kind of just wrapping up and winding down here, right? Obviously, you've gone through a lot of different areas of research here, but what would you say is the one, and you may have already touched on it, but what would you say you're most proud of your research?
Yeah, gosh. I think the thing that my mind immediately goes to is when we've had these opportunities to describe new species to science, right? And it's sort of, I feel like that contributes in a way that I never imagined growing up that I would ever contribute to, right? Like the idea of sort of discovering a new species, right? They exist, right? That's why I put that in quotes, right? But giving it a name and sort of discovering it for science, right, is something I never thought I'd ever do, right, growing up. And so that opportunity to do that has been really fun, really cool. But I think the other part for me, because I live it every day, that's so important to my research is how many students have had the opportunity to get involved in it, right? And I think at Bucknell and in my department, in biology, there's so many of us that are sort of on that same wavelength, right? It's about the research, it's about the questions, it's about getting publications out, all that sort of stuff, right? But it's also largely about showing students how to do the science and getting them involved. And our students end up as co-authors on papers. They end up presenting at national meetings, right? And so you sort of said, what am I most proud of? And that's probably it. It's probably I'm proud of the how much the students have been involved in that process for me.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Well, it sounds like it is a program that anyone interested, whether you're listening from, across the country or right around the corner in PA, anybody interested in studying biology, in biodiversity, check out Bucknell, check out everything on, well, we should say, check out Plants Are Cool too, because I feel like that's a pretty good stepping stone to get into it and just see how much you can do with that. Right. I know that's something I'm going to be checking out a little bit more too, and meet with families, having them take a look at it. So
thank you for saying that. There's actually one of those episodes was produced by one of the students in the lab. And so it's entirely focused on what is it like to do undergrad research in the lab, but also sort of generally and at Bucknell. So that might be one that students and parents might want to check out.
Fantastic. You give a good perspective of what a day in the life would look like.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I really appreciate everything, Chris. I mean, I think we learned a whole lot. I learned a whole lot. I'm hoping everyone else that is listening did and kind of understands, how they should look at your pathway, at what Bucknell can offer, why it's consistently been one of the top schools here, and why Plants Are Cool too, right? Might make that the episode name.
Nice. Thank you, Clay. It's been good to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. This has been Dr. Martine with Bucknell University, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.
Sounds good. See you, folks.
Thank you guys for being a part of College Knowledge. Just a reminder, if you're sending your student to school, visit elitecollegiateplanning.com for free resources and to book a free consultation. Thanks for listening to the College Knowledge Podcast with your hosts, Dave Kovach and Joe Kearns. We hope you enjoyed this week's exploration of higher education, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. That's all for this episode. See you next time.